The second point that I just wanted to to anybody in the panel is something that has been bothering me since I saw the title for this conference, which is Sustaining Commons, Sustaining Our Future. The key word here being our. I mean, when you're talking about plurality of languages, cultures, I would also like to see plurality of species reflected in the theme of this, conference. Somewhere, I tend to think "our" here means basically us, and there is a problem there. So, I mean, I'm just leaving this as a comment.
I want to address the "who is our future" and give it a different twist. Who owns the Amazon? Well, I think it should be who is the steward of the Amazon. Is it the indigenous people who live there? Is it the state of Brazil, or the nation of Brazil, or is it the world because it's the lungs of the world? I think the answer is out of the ownership property paradigm more into the stewardship paradigm, and how can we find new policy mechanisms that integrate all those levels in one? And one very interesting example is the trust fund that Ecuador has established for the oil, and it has international dimensions and national and local. That's a sort of the conceptual area I think we need to go to.
Is at one hand, I hear very legitimate calls, to which I'm also sympathetic of external governance for the commons, meaning that you need external defense for the commons, including through legal means, so that people cannot appropriate the commons. But on the other hand, if you look at the internal governance of the commons, the internal governance of the commons is based on new forms of democracy, is based on social norms, and these two logics sometimes tends to conflict. For instance, if you propose new type of contracts as external defense of the commons, a lot of commoners objected to that and say, yes, but that is not possible because the commons does not work around this logic. So I'm kind of interested to hear some comments on this stage.
Thank you. That's always been a problem, but we see at the GPL it works okay by providing a parameter. Land trusts sort of provide a membrane, property on the outside, commons on the inside. And then a friend of mine who works at the Berkman Center at Harvard they're trying to devise evolvable contracts, which apparently for a lot of software enterprises, because the evolution of the project is so speculative, any static contract can't work, and so investors are reluctant to get into it. So they're actually trying to devise evolvable contracts that can change over the course of the project, which is, I think, an interesting idea. I can't explain more than that, but I think the concept is very interesting, and there's practical efforts to work on it.
The things you spoke of languages, of culture, of dialects being eliminated, it happens more so in the urban areas where everything becomes generalized, where everything becomes sort of one, where everything becomes standardized. So when we look at the urban areas and when we look at streets or tanks or public spaces, do you think the commons has potential to be mobilized in the urban areas, especially because, as far as I know at least, there's no word for commons, for example, say in Kannada, because all our traditional rural commons have different words. So if I have to use a commons in urban area, can we mobilize it? Is it something which is possible? Thanks.
Many urban systems have a diversity of languages. Professor Pandit, who was the major linguist, showed that actually many people in the urban system speak a minimum of 5 functional languages. So one has to be a bit careful about that. I'll tell you what, I would put your question in a more frightening way. One of the biggest problems that India is facing in the next few decades is what I call the new enclosure movement, of forced migration from the villages into the cities. At that point, we might have to develop ideas of the commons, from the informational kind to around specific items like water, access to roads, access to resources. So I would relook at the commons experiment in 2 ways. One, I think the commons idea, as David put it beautifully, is a place where we can sit and wash our minds clean. So it's a place for thought experiments. And I think it's a place for alternative imaginations to come into play. So between the possibility of playful experiments and the possibility of alternative imaginations, maybe the commons in a modest way can create a new kind of grammar of voyage for democracy. Because yes, there are lots of democracies which have failed. Today, actually, if you look at it, it's the logic of electoral democracy which is genocidal. The majority does not want to live with the minority, it wants to exterminate it. Gujarat is an example, you can think of many others. So we have to reinvent the imagination of democracy, but still, that's the greatest imagination we have. But I'll go one further. I think we need to democratize democracy. And that demands a series of new kinds of experiments where the commons can play a part. In that, there's a hope, there's a sense of the future is democratic, and there's a place for wetlands.
I take both the questions in one go and say that whether it's technology or democracy, if there is no compassion and if there is no application of a moral compass, both these are trains that can be destructive. But if we shape it in a way that with a concern for humanity, both these are very, very powerful tools that can be used.
Since there are no new commons, I'd like to ask a question about a new way of attacking all commons or commons, namely transnational land deals or land grabbing. I recently visited Ghana and studied some projects there where Norwegian and other Nordic companies are involved in obtaining land for primarily and at least initially for biofuel production. And there has been a considerable debate of this, as everyone knows, and a particular case that we have in Norway is a youth organization that has presented a demand to our Minister for Environment and Development, demanding that he should ensure that Norway will not import any products that have been produced on grabbed land, and also that he should guarantee that no Norwegian company will be involved in projects, land grabbing projects, and specifically those that could threaten food security or the participation rights of local people. Indian companies are also involved in this business, particularly in Ethiopia, and I just wonder what the panel's views are on this, and also hear a little bit about what debate might have been here on this issue. Thank you.
Look, let me be very clear. This idea of India as a guardian nation is a bit misleading. Indians participated in the slave trade. Let's go back to the original question. My state from which I come, Gujarat, lot of if you look at the ancestors, they participated in the slave trade. So let's put history correct first. Second, the proposals we are giving, especially for irresponsible Indian multinationals, is actually saying, let us create a genocidal quotient for the products. It's not just land grab, because it can be misuse of labor, it can be trafficking, it can be various forms of obsolescence to various kinds of employment. So I think we need a much wider notion than just land grab. Land grab is obvious, but the kind of passive violences that go with many of these corporations needs to be challenged, and challenged in a more significant way. In fact, I think we should be a bit more demanding with these forms of ethics. So I push it further than you.
I was very struck by what you said. The confusion between multiplicity and plurality of the language, and what I'd like to know really is, how does this language, whether you call it language, you call it language at one point and then dialect, ignore the science of the commons? Because it just elaborates these two issues.
Today, botanical knowledge, the existing botanical knowledge covers roughly 9% of botanical life. The rest is in ethnoscience. The second example, we have 50,000 varieties of rice, which means 50,000 ways of dreaming, cooking, and myth. How do we save this? Where are the theories of knowledge by which we can contain these ways of life, protect them, and create them as memory? Because what is really happening is, as you eliminate language, dialects, look, India has roughly about 17 to 20 languages. But those are written scripts. All the oral knowledge is today not given official recognition. That is, to a certain extent, ways of knowledge, ways of memory, ways of life are disappearing. You can't contain them within the new commons. So what I'm really saying is, while I'm all for this kind of thing, the commons began as a subsistence economy. The survival of subsistence economy needs more than the new commons. It needs a new theory of democracy. We seem to be quite happy with genocidal elimination of our people. But in eliminating a people, we are eliminating more than information. So, I can begin like Edward Wilson and say, species loss is one species an hour, language loss is one dialect every fortnight. Where do you capture that loss? And where do I see scientists mourning for the disappearance of these things? Or the government? So what I'm trying to say is, you have to go back to the plurality of dialects which contain these knowledges. The standard, just take a simple thing, standard scientific botanical classifications will not capture the varieties of knowledge we have in tribal life. They don't even fit within the scientific schema of classification. There's a variety of knowledges, not just a variety of information. Second, let me take your question. You see, why I'm emphasizing obsolescence is, I think any commons, any civilization needs a variety of time. And to create that variety of time, you need a time of mourning, you need a time of silence. You need times of various kinds. You can't just work on innovation chains which drive without any sense of obsolescence, any sense of erasure, any kind of memory. I mean, you can come here into modern Gujarat and everyone will say, oh, genocide of a few Muslims is okay. It's even statistically normal. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't think there's anything as the commons. There's a plurality of commons. And they interlock in various ways to create codes of memory, ways of life. And what I'm trying to emphasize is, a commons is not just property. A commons is not just information. It is the embeddedness of a way of life, which needs protection, which needs some guarantee of at least pluralistic dialogue with ways of life which are trying to erase it. That's all. Yeah, it's old-fashioned. But I think if you begin with subsistence economies, I can see then the possibility of the dialogue with the new commons. I mean, India, Arjun Sargupta report a few years ago said, India is 70% the informal economy. But God damn it, for 50 years you've declared the informal economy illegal. What is the new commons going to do about it? If they help, we're grateful. But in the meanwhile, what are you going to do? Say goodbye to us? Or locate us in the Watts dictionary of displaced people and disappearing species?